So you're going to chip a groove, and then you're going to put the copper and slide it back and forth. But how, and that's going to cut the granite?
This is the first instance of this motif ever being used. This is where it all began. It's another innovation of this pyramid.
A material scientist with no interest in ancient Egypt pressed his face to a scanning electron microscope, looked at a 4,000-year-old granite cut, and found a mineral that has absolutely no business being there. Graham Hancock reveals the truth about how Egyptians cut granite, and what that mineral means has been tearing apart a century of academic consensus ever since. One find, one microscope. The entire official story, wrong. The mystery no one could solve. The pyramids are not the real mystery of ancient Egypt. Most of those structures are limestone, and we can explain limestone.
So you had like 5 inches of limestone that was left in the block.
So did someone remove that limestone?
Yes.
The real mystery is the granite. Granite rates 6 to 7 on the Mohs hardness scale. It is composed of quartz, feldspar, and mica, minerals so resistant to cutting that even today with diamond-tipped power tools, hydraulic saws, and industrial polishing rigs, working granite is slow, expensive, and punishing. It destroys your tools. It demands your time. It does not yield easily to anything. Yet the ancient Egyptians shaped it like clay. The king's chamber inside the Great Pyramid is built entirely of granite blocks, some weighing over 70 tons, fitted with joints so precise that engineers measuring them with modern instruments register tolerances within 1/1000th of an inch. The Valley Temple at Giza holds granite pieces locked together so tightly you cannot slide a razor blade between them. Statues carved from single granite blocks show surface detail so fine, so sharp.
What is actually going to do the cutting? It seems to me that copper is just going to blunt on granite. I can't believe it's going to cut the stone.
That under close examination, they look machined, not hand-worked. And then there are the drill cores. Pulled from ancient sites across Egypt, these cores show spiral grooves descending through solid granite, the signature of a rotating drill under load. Chris Dunn, a manufacturing engineer with over 40 years of precision machining experience, examined them firsthand. His reaction was immediate. He said the feed rates implied by those spiral grooves were not just impressive, they were impossible by conventional explanation. He had spent his entire career surrounded by CNC equipment and precision ground components, and what the ancient Egyptians achieved in granite matched or exceeded modern manufacturing standards. Not approximately, not loosely, precisely. So what was the official explanation? Copper saws loaded with sand as an abrasive, dolerite pounders, patience. Here's the problem with that. Copper rates 2.5 to 3 on the Mohs scale. Granite's quartz component rates 7. When you try to cut a harder material with a softer tool, the tool destroys itself before the stone yields. You can load that tool with abrasive, and it helps, but only up to the hardness of the abrasive you are using. Sand, ordinary quartz, sand, rates the same as the material you are trying to cut. You are not gaining anything. The physics are not ambiguous.
So here we are. Oh, there's a wonderful limestone sarcophagus. Untouched for more than 4,000 years.
And no amount of patience changes them. Dennis Stocks at the University of Manchester spent years running controlled tests. Copper tools, sand abrasive, real granite blocks. Results: progress measured in fractions of a millimeter per hour, heavy copper wear, rough cuts that looked nothing like ancient surfaces. Stocks admitted the experiments raised more questions than they answered. Neither method explains the precision. Surfaces flat to thousandths of an inch. Drill holes maintaining perfect circularity through their entire depth. Saw cuts straight and parallel over meters of unforgiving stone. That is not what happens when you grind rock with soft metal and sand. That is what happens when you have a real, systematic, industrial process. One you have spent generations mastering. And the scale of the problem only gets worse the longer you look at it. The sarcophagus inside the king's chamber is carved from a single block of red Aswan granite. Its interior dimensions are cut to an accuracy that modern machinists find genuinely surprising, polished to a flatness measurable in thousandths of an inch across the entire surface, not just a small patch. To produce that finish with copper and sand would require not just enormous time, but a level of consistency in tooling and pressure and technique that no experiment has ever demonstrated, even under ideal controlled conditions with modern measuring instruments. Then there is the question of sheer volume. The King's Chamber contains over 100 granite blocks. The relieving chambers above it hold massive granite beams stacked in precise layers accessible only through narrow shafts.
So this is the image that you have here, and what
Right.
this image shows us is the King's Chamber, the various shafts, the southern shaft, the northern shaft, and these shafts have been described as portals to stars because people have looked up through there.
This is not one craftsman's extraordinary achievement. This is industrial output, the same precision repeated hundreds of times across multiple structures, over generations of continuous construction. You do not produce that with improvised tools and hope. You produce it with a process so well established that your workforce can execute it reliably at scale. The conventional explanation has never addressed that reality. For 40 years, Graham Hancock kept saying, exactly this. The physical evidence does not match the conventional explanation. Something is missing. Mainstream archaeology's response was always the same. Hancock isn't trained. His theories are fringe. His questions aren't worth answering until he found what was missing. The discovery. In 2022, Hancock partnered with Dr. Masood Garb, a material scientist specializing in tribology, the scientific study of friction, wear, and lubrication. Dr. Garb had no stake in the ancient Egypt debate. He was a hard scientist with precision instruments, and he obtained permission to examine ancient Egyptian granite artifacts using scanning electron microscopy and energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy, tools that reveal surfaces at molecular resolution, completely invisible to any optical microscope.
We want to understand their method better. We're not amongst those who are saying, oh, this is rubbish, go away. We think it's interesting.
He expected to find exactly what Egyptologists had always described: sand particles, copper residue, the chemical fingerprint of brute force abrasion that had been the accepted story for over a century. That is not what he found. The wear patterns were wrong. The scratch signatures did not match sand. The surface geometry was inconsistent with what ordinary quartz abrasion produces. And when Dr. Garb isolated what was actually embedded deep inside those 4,000-year-old cutting grooves, he sat back from the microscope and called Hancock into the lab. Corundum, aluminum oxide, rating 9 on the Mohs hardness scale, second only to diamond, harder than anything in Egypt's natural geology. The mineral that forms rubies and sapphires in its natural crystalline state, the same material that modern industry uses every single day to cut, grind, and shape the hardest materials known to engineering, packed into cutting slurries, bonded into grinding wheels, coated onto industrial abrasive sheets, sitting right there, embedded in grooves cut into granite before Rome was a city. Here is what makes that finding extraordinary. Corundum does not occur naturally in Egypt in any form. Suitable for industrial use, the nearest major deposits lie in regions ancient Egypt had established trade connections with. But simply being near a source is not enough. Recognizing corundum's hardness properties among all the other minerals available, deliberately sourcing it, transporting it across significant distances, and processing it into a precision cutting compound is not something you stumble into. It requires intent.
It's partly because people in these fields have been, whether it's archaeology or Egyptology, which is a sort of subspecialism of archaeology, have been bombarded over the years with so much, quite honestly, rubbish, from people with badly thought through ideas about, for example, Giza and what it might mean.
It requires knowledge. Dr. Garb was direct. Using corundum effectively requires identifying the mineral, understanding its hardness relative to what you are cutting, grinding it to specific particle sizes calibrated for your application, and mixing it into a slurry at precise working concentrations. Too coarse and the cutting action becomes uncontrollable. Too fine and you lose abrasive power entirely. This was not lucky improvisation. This was applied material science executed with deliberate intent across a workforce trained to use it. One mineral. One microscope. 40 years of academic dismissal collapsed. If you want to keep going deeper on discoveries the mainstream won't touch, subscribe. We cover this stuff every week. The experiments. A microscope finding is evidence. It is not yet proof. Hancock understood the distinction, and he knew what had to come next. In early 2023, he organized controlled experimental trials in a working workshop. Granite blocks, copper tools, and 3 carefully chosen abrasive compounds. Stonemasons and material scientists working side by side, testing each variable systematically. 3 abrasives. Sand, the conventional theory. Quartz powder, slightly harder, naturally available in ancient Egypt, a reasonable intermediate hypothesis. And a corundum quartz slurry, the new hypothesis, formulated to match exactly what Dr. Garb had found in the ancient grooves. The results were not ambiguous. Copper with sand, roughly 0.5 millimeter of cutting depth per hour, painfully slow, heavy. Copper degradation, rough, uneven surfaces that matched nothing in the ancient record. Copper with quartz powder, approximately 0.8 millimeters per hour, marginally better, still nowhere near the performance required to explain ancient output.
There's no, without a steady stream of water, you're not getting new material in there to do the cutting action. You're not getting rid of the old powder, which is just interfering with the drill going down.
And still producing nothing close to ancient surface quality. Then they switched to the corundum quartz slurry, over 3 millimeters per hour, 6 times faster than sand. The copper tools lasted dramatically longer because the corundum was doing the cutting work. The metal was guiding and applying pressure, while the corundum particles did what they are designed to do, which is cut materials that nothing softer can touch. The surfaces came out smooth, clean, and geometrically accurate in a way that sand never produced under any tested condition. And the drilling. This is the part that changed everything. The drilling experiments produced core samples with spiral grooves descending through the stone, grooves matching the exact pattern found in ancient Egyptian drill cores, the same grooves that had baffled precision engineers for decades, the same grooves the copper and sand theory had never, under any experimental conditions, managed to reproduce. Right there on the workshop table, cut fresh into modern granite by reconstructed ancient methods. Not simulated, not approximated, matched. Nick Giza, a veteran stonemason with decades of granite experience, said the copper stopped fighting the stone and started guiding the abrasive. The cut went smooth, the speed jumped, the tool wear dropped. For the first time in his career, watching ancient methods work on modern stone, he said he could see exactly how the ancients did it. Not a theory, a demonstration. The slurry demanded real skill to run, precise consistency, even pressure, managed temperature. A process that punished inattention and rewarded deep familiarity with the material. Too thin and it lost cutting power. Too thick and it clogged the groove and stalled. Every variable mattered, and the craftsman working it had to read the stone and the tool simultaneously and adjust in real time. This was not brute labor. This was a discipline, a craft passed from master to apprentice across generations, refined through practice into something that looked effortless, only because the people doing it had spent lifetimes learning how.
At the time of Imhotep, it was absolutely impossible for mortals to be buried close to the key.
Exactly the specialized workforce you would expect from a civilization that engineered the pyramids. 3 independent lines of evidence: microscopic analysis, experimental replication, material science data, all converging on the same conclusion: the gatekeepers. Hancock presented his findings at a material science conference in late 2023. Not an archaeology conference, a room full of engineers, physicists, and material scientists who evaluate evidence on technical merit, not institutional pedigree. The reception was largely positive. When the findings reached mainstream Egyptology, the response fractured. Some archaeologists asked fair, rigorous questions. How much corundum would large-scale pyramid construction have required across all sites? Is there independent evidence of corundum trade networks active during the relevant dynasties? Inscriptions, transport records, depot sites? Could the traces represent contamination from later periods rather than original construction practice? These are exactly the questions real science demands. They are worth investigating seriously, and the corundum hypothesis is strong enough to survive that scrutiny. But a significant portion of the academic establishment did not engage with the science at all.
These 70-ton granite beams have been elevated to a height of more than 350 feet above the ground and carefully and precisely placed in position.
They engaged with the name Graham Hancock, the outsider, the man who wrote Fingerprints of the Gods, the man they had spent 40 years labeling a pseudoscientist, dismissing at conferences, and excluding from journals. Their position was stated openly. Hancock's involvement taints the findings regardless of scientific merit. The data did not matter. The experimental replication did not matter. The credentialed material scientists who designed, ran, and reviewed the research did not matter. The name on the paper was disqualifying. Hancock addressed this in a 2024 interview. He said Egyptologists told him that even if the corundum finding was correct, he should not be the one presenting it, that his lack of formal credentials disqualified him, even standing alongside material scientists with reproducible data. He said it was never about whether the science was right. He said it was never about truth. It was about gatekeeping. The resistance was never about evidence. It was about authority, about who is permitted to rewrite the story of human civilization, and who gets told to sit down. But evidence does not care about credentials. The corundum hypothesis keeps gaining ground among engineers, material scientists, and archaeologists willing to examine the data regardless of who collected it. What this really means. Let's be clear about what the corundum discovery does and does not prove. It does not validate everything Hancock has ever proposed. His broader arguments about lost civilizations and the true age of the Sphinx remain contested. The corundum finding is not a blank check for alternative archaeology. But on this specific, concrete, measurable question, how did ancient Egyptians cut granite with the precision that stops modern engineers cold? The evidence supports Hancock's challenge to the consensus answer, completely. Here is what it actually means. It means the ancient Egyptians understood mineral hardness at a sophisticated level that mainstream Egyptology never credited them with. Not intuitively, systematically. They classified materials by hardness, understood the relationship between abrasive hardness and cutting effectiveness, and built that knowledge into repeatable industrial processes. This is not a civilization improvising. This is a civilization that ran experiments, drew conclusions, and applied them at scale. It means they developed real processing techniques, grinding corundum to optimize particle sizes, mixing slurries to precise working consistencies, training craftsmen in specific application methods that qualify as industrial material science by any objective measure.
I don't care for revisionist historians because, you have to consider what people were doing, their mindset in the day.
Knowledge that does not appear spontaneously. Knowledge that is built deliberately, tested against results, corrected, refined, and then transmitted from one generation to the next through structured apprenticeship. The kind of knowledge that leaves no written record but leaves a very clear physical one, if you use the right instruments to look for it. Consider what that transmission required. Every craftsman who operated a corundum slurry on a live construction project had to understand the material well enough to adjust it in real time, to add liquid when the consistency thickened, to read the cutting sound and feel for signs of groove clogging, to maintain the exact pressure that kept the abrasive working without destroying the geometry of the cut. That knowledge lived in the hands and ears and judgment of skilled workers. It was trained, not written, and it was reliable enough to produce the king's chamber. They were not primitive people struggling with inadequate tools and compensating with raw manpower. They were brilliant people who had solved an extremely hard engineering problem with elegant, technically demanding methods. Methods so well developed that evidence of them was sitting in plain sight on thousands of examined artifacts for over a century. Invisible only because no one reached for the right instruments to look. The problem was never the evidence. The problem was the assumption that the answer was already known. That assumption cost archaeology a century of understanding, and it raises a question that goes far beyond granite. They have been waiting 4,000 years for someone with a scanning electron microscope and no assumption about what they would find. The question that remains. In a tribology lab, Dr. Masoud Garb stared at a cut made in granite over 4,000 years ago and saw corundum where no one had ever thought to look. In a workshop, Nick Giza dragged a copper blade loaded with corundum slurry across a granite block and watched it cut smooth, fast, and clean, the way it must have cut when the pyramids were new and the craftsmen who built them were still alive to see them rise. Graham Hancock spent 40 years being told he did not understand ancient Egypt, mocked at conferences, dismissed in journals, called a fraud on television, ignored by the very institutions that should have been asking the same questions he was asking. He kept asking anyway. He kept pointing at the physical evidence. He kept saying the official answer did not fit the physical reality. Then he brought proof. Not theory, not speculation. Physical evidence, experimental replication, material science reviewed by credentialed researchers with no reason to protect any particular narrative. 3 independent lines of evidence, all converging on one conclusion. The ancient Egyptians cut granite using corundum-based abrasive slurries, a sophisticated industrial technology built on deep knowledge of mineral properties, long-distance supply networks for rare materials, and craft techniques refined across generations of master practitioners. Fingerprints left on every cut surface, every drill hole, every polished face of stone. Always there, for as long as researchers have been examining these structures, waiting for someone to look with the right instruments, and without the weight of a century of comfortable consensus pressing down on what they were allowed to find. They were not struggling, they were mastering, and that forces the question that should keep every archaeologist awake. If we miss this, an entire abrasive technology hiding in plain sight across a century of examined artifacts. What else have we missed? How many ancient techniques have been dismissed as impossible simply because no one thought to use the right tools to look? If Hancock was right about this after 40 years of being told he was wrong, the answer to that question matters more than anyone in mainstream archaeology is currently comfortable admitting. The proof is in the corundum, and the corundum is in the granite. If this changed how you see the ancient world, subscribe and drop in the comments. What do you think they got wrong about ancient Egypt next?